Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend, the master, first AD, writer, producer from Hollywood. Tell us a little bit about War Games. You can see the Crystal Palace screenshot on the wall there. Didn't you guys have to do that? That was sort of before like Twitter, right?
Well, I think you better put the microphone down and everybody better settle down and light up something because this is going to take a while.
Cheers.
L'chaim. This was a picture that was so new. War Games was so new to the idea of photographing a computer screen, a live computer screen, that no one at MGM, where we finally landed, knew which union was going to string the cable from the computer to the monitor under the stage floor. They fought about that. Those of you who remember Jack Coffey in 695 will remember that. The rest of you will know what the hell I'm talking about. Frankly, it's my honest opinion that no one's going to know what I'm talking about.
Well, tell us a little bit about the setup. There's you said there was over 50 screens, including the big ones.
There were, honestly, I can't remember how many big screens there were. We had, my recollection is we had 24 process projectors. We had 98 computer screens in the Crystal Palace, and they were driven by the computer screens in the Crystal Palace were driven by two Godbout S100 computers running 14 blue solid-state music boards that were generating video graphics. So we had 12 video graphic images of maps, and we could show explosions and various other things happening. And
now, was that generated on the fly? All those images of Crystal Palace when New York would get bombed by Russia, whatever. Was that generated on the fly, or was that pre-computed, pre-rendered, and then played back on the rear projection?
The big screens were just as you described it, Senor. Those were process screens on the back wall, and what happened was we had to make realistic simulations of the way a thermonuclear war would start. One of them, interestingly enough, was because we were racking our brains and we were movie guys and nobody knew anything about this stuff and there was no Wikipedia, so we looked it up and guessed. And one of our guesses was that Gaddafi in Libya would take over Chad and somebody in Russia would defend Chad, and that's how the war would start. And that actually happened.
Wow, so that was the scenario.
Yeah, each one of these screens had a scenario. But anyway, the scenarios, whatever they were, BS or legitimate, plausible or not, they were basically lines drawn as animation. And this is so long ago. We had 8K address space, 65/535 for you youngsters. This was so early.
Wait, isn't that 16,384? That's 16K. 8K?
8K, 65/535.
Okay.
No, you're right. Now I'm embarrassed. Cut
8K
this.
is 8192.
Cut this, please.
On the live feed.
I'm sorry, I quit.
This is NORAD. This is Brass Hat.
I thought I had kill rights on this. I can't believe I'm going to be humiliated after all these years.
No kill right on the internet.
So, anyhow, as I was saying before, I was so amusingly interrupted by the host. We animated this on a Hewlett-Packard 3000 color computer, which was extremely advanced for its time. Today, you have more in your pocket on an old iPhone. The guy who did these animations, Colin Cantwell, came to the Universal lobby wearing a parachute, and it was a purple parachute pantsuit made out of parachute silk that you could see through, and you could see he was wearing nipple rings. And I'm sitting in the Universal commissary.
True story.
True story. And where this guy had come from was, for those of you who can remember the Star Wars movie where the Millennium Falcon comes across the top of the screen and you see the underbelly and there's all those pieces on it and it goes on forever.
You mean the Star Destroyer, the Empire Star Destroyer?
Thank you very much.
Right,
I'm sure I got it wrong.
Yeah, got it.
Folks, send all your letters to... Okay. Anyway, that'll be cut. Watch that.
You can always go beep. You can
Yeah.
always beep stuff out.
I actually did a picture where we said something about Scientology and they made us do sound effects of plates dropping over the background.
Wow.
And if anybody can name that picture, I'll give you... So anyway, we had to make the images on the screens in the back. We had to make them using this Hewlett-Packard 3000 color printer. And it took a long time because it was very slow and it used Hewlett-Packard Color Basic. Oh my God.
Now, would it actually draw lines like vector graphics, or would it
No.
actually have to redefine the character set to make enough characters in the character set to make it look like Russia and the United States? There was a map there, so...
See, he's asking trick questions, guys, because I told him that years ago and he still remembers. Yes, that's what we did. My friend Steve took the EEPROM, which was where we had we had a prom, we had it in EEPROM, the ASCII character set, and we remapped the 5x9 matrix for the letter A, the letter B, into the edges of the United States.
Wow.
And so therefore,
Cool.
that's the only way to make graphics back then, because that's all we had were those 5x9 matrices. Anyway, this Hewlett-Packard Color Basic, once we had the program, we had to get it to film. And this was so early in the process that we had a 35 millimeter 400 foot load camera, and it was what would be called a downshooter if you were in animation, and it was locked off against the flat screen of the Hewlett-Packard monitor, and every 5 minutes it would take one of these frames in an animation. The frame would get drawn and then we would send a signal. It was called a strobe back in those days. We'd send a signal. I do not drink, and I do not recommend anyone over 18 drink, and for those of you over 18, drink safely. And everybody else, I've lost it completely. Yes, strobe. And so then our 400 foot load would take one frame of the HP color computer screen, and then it would take 5 more minutes the program would take to draw the next screen, and then we would send a strobe down to the camera, which would take another frame. And every week a guy would come by. We had a little closet on Culver Boulevard in Culver City, and a guy would come by and reload the camera and take the film that had been exposed but not processed, and he would take it out. I'm watching a man drink alcohol in front of me. Children, please, drink sensibly. And we processed the film, and then we made projection plates. And my friend will remind us all that we don't do this anymore, but we used to make a plate. You spent 5 days, 5 extra days in the lab as they coated the stock because it would run through the process projector so often. So now we have this plate of Libya bombing Chad and World War III starts. And we got, 80 scenarios, and we got 24 projectors to put it on. So the trick is, for those of you who are interested in this sort of thing, which I think are 3 people and they're all in Des Moines, the trick is, this is the first time anyone ever photographed a 30 frame per second computer image live with a 24 frame per second duty cycle motion picture camera. And you had to get sync and phase.
How did you do that?
Well, first we made the computers run at 24 frames, not 30. And we did that by, since we had control of all the images on the computers, that's the computers on the floor, the 98 screens I'm talking about.
So you did tests and then you put them at 24 and then you could run the tests kind of thing and see.
No. You're thinking about how film is made to go faster. No, we had a computer video board, solid state music, and we changed the dot clock so it didn't refresh and create a new image every 30 times a second. It did it 24 times a second. We changed the way the video board operated. Now, so now we have the video board going at 24 frames a second, but we may end up with, you want me to go faster?
No, I'm saying it's going at 24 frames a second.
Okay, he spun his hand around in a circle, and where I came from, where I learned radio in college, that's how old I am, everybody just turned this off, that meant go faster. So he's showing the film thing going around in a circle like you do when you put your hand around your ear and somebody's going crazy. They're all leaving. I've cleared the room, folks. There's nobody here but you and me. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and something's got to get you through the night. So anyhow, I've forgotten completely where I am, and anybody who's trying to learn a goddamn thing by following this, it's going to be hopeless.
The first step was to get the computers to run from 30 frames to 24 frames a second.
So now the computers are running at 24 frames a second, and they're producing our little images with our 5x9 matrix of ASCII replaced not with the letter A, but the shape of California, or the left edge anyway. So we want to get those images to be not only running at 24 frames because our camera's running at 24 frames, so they'll be stationary, that's sync, but we also have to achieve a phase relationship. So when we start the first part of our frame exposure, a full frame is already drawn and stationary on the camera. So we photograph the image in the position we want. And we did that. We were the first people to invent this. We put a phase shift delay by adding time between when we generated the frame and when we permitted the frame to appear on the camera, on the monitor, by spinning hexadecimal thumb wheels on a box we made. That's how crude
like
this.
Custom analog hardware almost.
Not almost. It was custom, but it was analog. It was just adding resistance by flipping a thumb wheel, marked in hexadecimal. I mean, this is Geek Central. Anyhow.
Yeah, but this movie, the important thing about this podcast is that this movie stands today. I mean, not only politically in our current, situation with North Korea constantly doing tests of nukes and Iran and everything else that you see in the news, but War Games as a movie is a classic.
Yes. However, I have to say the characterizations are very broad. I got more burnt eyebrow than burnt ash here. Very broad characterizations, but at the same time, see, it cracks me up when people think little toss-off remarks like that are so funny. But God, story, if you want to have.
Check. This is segment 2, DOS, finishing the story.
So
Named DOS.
Yeah, so let's see. So we got sync and we got phase, and we had to check it twice a day. But understand, this box we built, we actually got Panavision to give us a Panaflex body. We didn't need a magazine, and we got an oscilloscope, and we got an electrical engineer who lived in oscilloscope worlds, and we built a cable to plug in to what's called the accessory socket, or as some fondly say, the toilet seat, because there's a little flipper and it looks just like the shape of, and you lift it up and you think you're lifting a toilet seat lid. But it's this little tiny thing on the side, and it's got 9 pins in it. This is 100 years ago. And you plugged in a cable, and one of those pins would tell you would take a signal, because we were driving it. I got to tell you how that worked. Would take a signal that would be the sync signal for process projection. That would make the camera phase match the projector phase on the rear screen of the big images that you see up on the wall.
On the actual set of Crystal Palace, right?
On the actual set of Crystal Palace and on all sets where process works. That's how it works. And that's why it takes 5 extra days in the lab to make what's called a plate, the strip of film. At Warner Brothers, they called them keys. God only knows why. And the plate runs back and forth through the projector. So, because you're always doing the take over again, so you have to back the plate up to number 1. So, the plate, all of those plates run on a wall full of process projectors. And those process projectors, that was a very mature technology. That was 50 years old by 1980, whatever this movie was made in. And so it worked in a very straightforward way. There was a master projector that drove what's called a Selson motor, S-E-L-S-Y-N, and the Selson motor drove all the slave projectors. So all the projectors would be in sync. Plus, there was a long-standing relationship between how to get that sync signal from the projector to the camera. So there was no trouble in keeping a camera in sync with 24 screens. The problem was getting all of those screens to be on the lens axis, which I still don't understand how we didn't lose the edge, the luminance. I don't know what those screens were made of, but I was already off the picture. I'd been fired, rehired, and quit by the time this happened, and was on my way to Jaws 3, which I quit when they asked me for a stunt baby when the director wasn't too drunk to talk. And then I left that picture to go to New York with John Landis and do Trading Places, which wasn't bad, to give up Jaws 3 to go to Trading Places. Anyways.
Come on, Jaws 3, that's, it's a sequel, and Trading Places is a classic.
The guy, the director, was so fucking drunk on that picture, I would have the minute and 40 seconds it took to ride back in the van with him from the back of Marine World, or whatever the fish park was, down the road to his hotel to ask the questions about what are we doing tomorrow. Then he'd jump out of the van like his ass was on fire, run into the hotel, and he would come out 6-7 minutes later so drunk he was incomprehensible. There were no more questions to ask. Better to ask the driver because the director wasn't home. Anyway, that's why I was happy to get off of that picture. Hello, Mr. So there was a point where the Whopper, the computer that would do the thermonuclear war planning that was at the heart of the movie, it had to be built and it had to be chronologically accurate. And oddly enough, that was a hobby of mine at the time. Presper, Eckert, Mauchley, those names are known to nobody. But this was a time when the Department of Defense would have built a computer of this approximate size and shape, but would not have anything like this kind of capacity. And so I brought the production designer, the man who's in charge of the folks who actually do the fabrication, I brought him to a spot where there was one of these very old computers, because this movie was made at MGM in 1983 or 8, pops into my mind, I can't remember. And this was still alive when the machine would have been retired in the 60s. So the movie business was very far behind the times. In fact, I could walk into the guard shack, where the guard's name was Ken Hollywood. I'm not kidding, you can look it up. And they had IBM Zone 12 punch cards. And that's how people kept their time cards. And so I looked at this and I realized that somewhere there was a card punch machine and a computer that accepted those. That's what's called EAM equipment, electronic adding machine equipment. And there are some pictures that I understand will be running alongside this. So I knew about this equipment, and when I saw the cards, I knew those cards went with that equipment. And that equipment was contemporaneous with the time when this sort of computer would have been first been built by what would have been called DARPA, Defense Agency Advanced Research Projects. The folks who started the internet, not Al Gore.
They work a lot with MIT, I think.
Yes, they work a lot with MIT. That's a plug, and it threw me off, and I need to take a moment to read.
We're talking about the Whopper.
Yes, thank you very much.
Inspired by the electronic accounting machine.
So I bring in this British production designer that knew nothing about computers, as did almost everyone at the time, and I showed him this EAM machine, which will be up on the screen now, and there's a curved shape to it that was very specific at the time. When I was a college kid and my father said to me, "You will get a job in the summer," I got a job moving cards from one EAM machine to another in the Chicago Department of Water and Power. I knew what these machines looked like. I knew what they felt like. And this was one of those machines. And so the production designer saw the machine and then knew what to build. And later, I had dinner with Alan Kay, one of the four Apple Fellows, the first four Apple Fellows.
Hey, he was one of the fellows at the MIT Media Lab as well.
Alan Kay was a very big deal, still is. I just haven't seen him in a long time. And he told me that was the most contemporaneously accurate computer depiction he'd ever seen, because the production designer finally knew what the computer should look like. And there's a picture.
By the way, just as an interjection, do you know that those guys at MIT, along with Alan Kay, predicted that the mainframe would go to the microcomputer, back in the 50s, and microcomputer would go to the desktop, and everyone would have a desktop and then to a laptop, or what Alan Kay used to call a Dynabook, and then from a Dynabook or a laptop, they would go to handheld. So everyone's on handheld now. That's why I know we're at the end of the Moore's Law cycle.
Yes, because the machines have become so small and so dense that they are theoretically cannot be made any smaller. So those lights are bullshit. That is solely for the fact that this is a visual medium. And if you look at a gray box, you could fall asleep. But for example, if you actually look at a missile firing position, it looks, the actual real thing in the ground, in the silos, look old and boring, like a cheap telephone in the truck somewhere. It doesn't look like anything. Here's a picture of a Whopper now, a real one. Where's that curved frame I wanted to show them? So we're at the place where we have the master projector driving the slave projectors and also driving the camera. This is the mature technology called process. And if you go back and look at old black and white movies, 30s, 40s, 50s, two people in a car, and the background through the window or through the side windows, that's process. And it looks different, and it's the wrong f-stop because everybody except Francois Edouard didn't know what they were doing. Let's move on with this. So now we pick up the process here. It's working with the camera, but I got 98 computer screens to fill with 7 images, which we duplicated across 14 boards. I said 12 before, but I think it's 14.
So you photographed with a
No. These
94.
These are not photographed. These are the computer generated, like not screens full of graphics because we didn't have that.
Playback.
But this would be screens that you'd put up that would show any text on any of these monitors, and you made it look like every monitor had something different because we'd laid out the cables under the stage to come up on the monitors so that you could shoot in this aspect ratio, and the high probability was the images you'd see on the screen and a lot of the standard framings wouldn't be duplicated. It took a lot of time to figure that out. Anyway, we still have process up on the big wall. We still have it driving the camera, and we still have all the images and the 98 monitors on the floor in sync, but in sync to what? How do we get the process projector to talk to a box to talk to the 98 cameras? So the way we solved it is we got, and this was other smart guys, we got a Hall effect magnet, which is, they used to start motorcycle thumb switch with it that way. I don't know if they still do that, but it's Faraday's law. You create an electrical pulse by moving a magnet through a field, or I can't remember enough. Or maybe it's too late in the evening to remember. But the point is, when that magnet moves, a pulse is generated. So we tape the magnet to the shaft of the master process projector. And every time that turned one time and brought up a new frame, we got a pulse off the process projector just for us, not for the camera. This was our own loop that we went back to our two Godbout computers and our 14 solid-state music boards, and we said, here's your Genlock, boys.
Spell Godbot computers. Or
Godbout, Godbout. When Bill Gates was a skinny little kid, and it was 1995, and in Popular Electronics, there was a picture of a 68, no, it had to be an 8800, based computer that you started up in Octal. That was when it started. Octal on the front panels, and it wasn't too long after that where we were doing what we were doing. And the box I just described that would take a pulse like that from a process projector and give it to the computer's images to create them all being in sync with the process projector. That box was built by us and this electrical engineer and the oscilloscope and the camera, and it took us a weekend. And wow. Now Panavision sells it every week. Right. That's what that is, and that's where it ended. And I think everybody looked at that movie and said we couldn't do it, and we did it.
Not only that, but what do you think about the current political environment with respect to where the movie led us to the sort of brink of thermonuclear war, and that's sometimes talked about in the press?
Well, the trouble is when you say let the field commanders close to the action decide, it all looks great until you end up with Dr. Strangelove, where Sterling Hayden says, for reasons that no one really understood, he was going to go start his own war because the politicians have neither the will or the understanding, as Clemenceau once said. I think that was the quote in the movie. And so you worry about a field commander with nuclear capabilities on a submarine, in an airplane. Remember that German guy that was flying the airplane, passenger plane, and decided he'd had it all, and when his pilot went out to the bathroom, he locked himself in and drove the plane into the mountains? So,
wow, yeah, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Pilots, yeah, sure, when they let you fly a nuclear bomb, you're going to be tested 16 more times than the German guy, right? And you're not going to go blind and catch him by surprise. But at the end of the day, you can hide things if you're clever enough, and you don't know when somebody's going to say, oh, I think I'm going to go for a ride they didn't anticipate. Oops. So I'm not so sure that field commanders having the ability to launch a nuclear tactical weapon is a good idea. But I just might be a chicken shit liberal. What do I know?
Okay, well, thanks, Commander Green. Have a good Friday night, everybody. And
here you come.
Give us a little foreshadowing on Blues Brothers. You worked on that one as first AD, correct?
I was first AD, and at the end, I believe my contribution was considered to be good enough that they gave me an associate producer credit, which was very nice. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Good night. Have a good one.